So today we're going to be starting lesson 5. And in lesson 5, we're going to talk about the planning and monitoring that you will need to do as a BA. Okay? So what this topic is about is, given all the many different things we've talked about that a BA does, whether you're leading requirement gathering or you're participating in ceremonies, right? How do you plan your work? I mean, you can already tell we're just about halfway into the training, and we've mentioned like a gazillion things that a BA will either need to do or need to be a part of. So how do you prioritize your work? How do you plan it? How do you figure out who to talk to when? How do you figure out if you're talking to two different people about the same thing and they're giving you conflicting information? How do you go about resolving it? At the end of the day, as a BA, you have a deliverable. It is your responsibility to deliver what you've been hired to deliver. You need to figure out how to do your work. Like, nobody's really going to tell you how to do it. They may tell you how much time has been allocated to gathering requirement, but you are the one who would need to then prioritize, okay, who do I talk to first? How do I gather as many requirements as possible within this time frame and still be able to verify that these requirements are correct? Okay. So the approach basically describes the overall method that you will follow when you're doing your BA work. Okay. You need to decide on the methodology. Usually the decision on methodology is done at the organization level, to be honest. If the organization is agile, then you'd go use agile methodology. And if it's waterfall, you use waterfall. However, let's say that you get hired for like a main project, and that has happened to me severally, right? But as you keep working on that main project, there may be smaller projects that would need to be worked on, and they're not necessarily going to hire like a full-time BA to do it. Okay, they may ask you if you're able to take it on, right? After all, when you were interviewing, you told them how, you could multitask and still be able to deliver, right? And so they may take you up on that. And sometimes it may even be you volunteering for the extra work. And so for that extra work, maybe it's a small piece of work that needs to be done, and it's okay to just do waterfall, right? Because from the beginning to the end of it, it's not going to take so much time. Basically, so on a smaller scale that way, you may need to decide on the methodology, and it could be hybrid. There are projects where they do a combo of waterfall and agile, but typically it's one or the other, right? You need to identify roles and responsibilities. We're going to go into the RACI matrix in a bit. But the matrix basically tells you, who to go to for what. Basically, who do you need to give information to? Who do you hold accountable for something? Who is responsible? Okay, you need to figure out the techniques you want to employ in doing your BA work, and we're going to cover quite a fair bit of techniques today. And then you need to define the deliverables you'll be producing. Okay, so when they hired you, they might have said, oh, you're going to be leading requirement gathering, right? Which is true. But along the line, you may need to create a design decision. I showed you one the other day, right? Nobody is necessarily going to tell you it's time to prepare a design decision. Now that you know what a design decision is, when you get to the point in a project where, okay, a decision needs to be made about two critical things, and you need to be able to communicate what this decision is about. Typically, you put it in a design decision document, okay? So let's look at how to analyze stakeholders. Most, if not all of your stakeholders will fall into one of four categories. Now, if you look at this image before you, to the left of it, you see it says power or influence. And then to the bottom of the diagram, it shows level of interest. When you're trying to figure out who's who, you're new on the job, right? You're not going to know everybody on day one. You're new to the project. You want to know, okay, who are the decision makers, right? And how do I approach them? Who are the people who have the information that I need, and how do I approach them? Okay, and so this grid, it's typical of BAs to use this grid. When you're looking at the grid, if you look at the top left, it says keep satisfied. Who are the people who fall into this category? They are the people with a lot of power, but so somebody with a lot of power would be maybe like your project sponsor, okay, or the person who's going to approve the project at the end of the day. So one quick thing to mention is every time a project happens, even though they approve the money and they approved $1 million and $3 million, at some point in the project, it's called a go or no go. Meaning, even after spending this $3 million, we may decide to not go forward with the solution. Okay, so anybody who has the power to make that type of decision on the project is someone with power or influence on the project. Okay, so if somebody has high power but low level of interest, it's not that they're not interested in the project, they are, but they're not the end user of the product. So they're not as fired up about it. However, they're the ones signing the check. They have high power. Those are people you want to keep satisfied. You don't ever want them to be unhappy. And if you sense that they're getting unhappy, you need to figure out why and you need to address it. Okay, so that's the top left corner. If you look at the lower left corner, those are the people with low power and low interest. This group of people, I wouldn't say don't care about them, but don't spend too much time because they don't have enough power to derail your project. Neither are they even interested in the project that you're doing. So those are the low power, low level of interest. If you look to the top right corner that says manage closely, those are the people with high power and high interest. Maybe the solution that you're creating, this implementation, directly impacts their department. And in addition to that, this person is one of the decision makers. You need to manage them closely. You need to read their pulse. You need to know when they're dissatisfied and how to address it. You need to manage them closely. They're not the type of people that 1 entire week or 2 weeks will pass and you haven't even interfaced with them at all. Okay? And then if you look at the lower right corner, that's where we have the high interest but low power. People who would be in high interest and low power will typically be your end users. You know, so when they say, oh, go talk to the assistant manager of accounting because they'll be able to tell you about their process, their level of interest is very high. This implementation is what they've been waiting for 10 years. They're going to be bugging you all the time asking for updates, right? Even though they don't have enough power to make any decision on the project. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, and you're going to need to go back and look at this diagram again. But what is the essence of me talking about this diagram is that you need to categorize every stakeholder you're working with. If you put a high power, high interest person and you mistakenly categorize them in the low power, low interest, what may happen is that you're not going to relate with them as you should. You're not going to keep them up to date as you should. You're not going to invite them to the right meetings because you didn't even think they needed to be in a meeting. So before you start making that decision, oh, this is the person I should be talking to, this is the person who should be in all my meetings, first you need to know what quadrant they belong to. When you join the project, they've given you a list of 5 stakeholders and they said, oh, there are going to be more stakeholders, but you need to figure them out. The 5 stakeholders they've given you, if you don't know, okay, who really belongs where, talk to your PM about it. Your PM hopefully got hired before you, and if you got hired before them, they're going to be clueless as well. But as a BA, you need to figure out who goes in where, because that's how you begin to determine, okay, I'm going to talk to this person for requirement gathering. Okay, I'm going to talk to this person when I start running into issues with a stakeholder who's not bulging. I'm trying to talk to them. I'm scheduling meetings. They're not listening. I'm trying everything that I can. Nothing is working right. At some point, you need somebody to intervene. You may need somebody in the high power, high interest quadrant. But if you don't even know who belongs to high power, high interest, how would you know who to talk to? Sorry, I'm just going to. Oh, Stella, can you hear us now? I hope you can. Okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. So this is power, interest, greed in a nutshell. Okay? Moving on. So let's talk about it a bit more. A stakeholder who's high power, high interest needs to be managed actively and kept informed of each step in the project. They will be instrumental in achieving the project outcome, meaning they're the kind of people that even though you've slaved morning and night, if they get unhappy with that project, even if they can't stop it, they can delay it. They have that much power. Stakeholders in the high power, low interest, they need to be kept satisfied. I mean, they're not particularly interested in the project, like I told you, it doesn't impact them. However, you need to deal with them cautiously, since they may use their power in a way that will derail all your 1 year of hard work. Okay, people can be that petty in project environments. Low power, high interest. These are the people that need to be kept informed to ensure no major issues are arising. Okay. This group can be very helpful with your project. They have high interest. They don't have power, right? Like I said, these are like your end users, the people you're meeting with frequently to gather requirements. And then we have the low power, low interest. You just need to monitor them. Don't bug them. If you invite them to a meeting, they probably won't attend. But if there's a need to invite them and keep it moving. Okay? So stakeholder engagement, who's a stakeholder to start with? A stakeholder is somebody who is contributing directly or indirectly to that implementation you're working on, that solution, right? They will be impacted directly or indirectly by that solution. Okay? And so you have different categories of stakeholders. See how we talked about the power, interest, greed, right? Different stakeholders fall into different categories. You need to identify the best way of communicating with each stakeholder group. If you're communicating with a group of stakeholders that are VPs and directors, they honestly don't want to listen to you for 1 hour, no matter how fantastic your topic is. They don't have time for that. Know your stakeholder and then define how you're going to communicate best with them. Higher management, generally, they do well with PowerPoint. You put your main points in there, you have graphs in there, they can look at the slide and get what you're saying. They don't necessarily want you to speak for 15 minutes nonstop, because if you do, you'd lose them. When you're planning your stakeholder engagement, factor in the degree of complexity that may arise. If you're meeting with a group of stakeholders at once, especially when you're new to BA, don't start meeting with 20 stakeholders at once. You'd feel like running out of the meeting. Because if 20 people start going back and forth and talking about something you're even clueless about, it becomes difficult to manage. So always remember, the more the number of stakeholders, the more complex it may become for you. Okay? Your stakeholders can be internal or external. The internal stakeholders will be people who are within your organization. They have the expertise, they have the knowledge, they know what the business needs, they know the constraints, they know the business rules, right? External are people outside of your organization, so it can be auditors, vendors, and so on. Okay? Your internal stakeholders are the ones you'd work with more frequently. However, let's say you're working on a project where you're buying a tool from a vendor and the vendor is helping you with the implementation, then you're going to be engaging with the vendor a lot as well. So for stakeholder management, a quick way to approach it is, one, identify your stakeholders, document their needs, analyze the power. So people call it influence, interest, or power, interest, whatever they call it, it's one and the same, right? So as you're documenting the needs, right, know who's who. You don't want to spend all your time documenting the need of the clerk when you haven't, you don't want to spend all your time implementing the need of the clerk when the need of the VP that signed the check has been pushed to the bottom. Unless the need of the VP is not a need. Let's say it's a want, just a desire, right? Okay. Then you manage your stakeholders' expectations as well. you're not going to be able to deliver everything they've asked for. I've hardly worked on a project where we could deliver every requirement, even to the last bit, because there's never enough time or enough money to do it. So you're going to have to manage expectations, work with them to prioritize what's most important, deliver those first. And if there's enough time and money and the organization agrees to it, you deliver the rest. But you can't just unilaterally decide, this is not very important, I'm not going to push it to the developers. No. If that is the case, the development team or the powers that be have decided that we're not implementing this, you still need to communicate it to the stakeholders. Okay, you manage expectation and you take action. Then you review and repeat and you keep, that's how you manage your stakeholders in a nutshell. Keep them informed, let them know what's going on. Okay? Some organizations use what we call a stakeholder management plan. And this document basically contains information specifying how you're going to interface with each stakeholder. Okay? In that document, typically, you have the RSI that I spoke about earlier. And again, we're still going to go into a bit detail about that. And you include a communication plan for your stakeholders. What is the frequency of communication? What are you going to be communicating? Are you communicating quarterly? Is there like a bi-weekly meeting you're going to be having? Who would be in the meeting? Who will be required? When you're sending a meeting invite, not everybody may be required in the meeting. Some people are required and some people are optional, meaning for anybody you place as optional, if they don't come to the meeting, it's okay. Okay? And those are the little things that you need to be aware of as you get into that project environment and you begin to invite people to meetings. Okay, let's talk about stakeholder nomination and identification. So the project sponsor is one of your primary stakeholders. And the sponsor is one of the first stakeholders that you're going to engage with. You're going to get a lot of information from them, especially if you're new on the project, okay? They may be able to help you identify the participants that you will engage during requirement gathering, verification, and validation. They may identify one or two people and then leave the rest to you to identify. And if they already have the list of all the stakeholders, they will share with you as well. When you're nominating stakeholders, first identify all the different, maybe departments that have interest in the solution. They say we're implementing Salesforce. So, okay, the marketing department will be impacted, sales department will be impacted. Start at that high level, identify the departments, then begin to drill down. So if we know marketing department is going to be impacted, we may then approach the marketing manager to say, oh, you know, now that we're about to start this implementation, we're going to need to have a thorough understanding of your processes. Are there any people within your department that you'd recommend I connect with to be able to gather the requirements? Okay. You can also identify stakeholders during workshops or interviews, right? And other means. And typically how this is done is that at the onset of a project, there's some project planning meetings that would happen. At this point, you haven't started gathering requirements. It's still, you know, project planning, getting people together, right? If you've been hired and you're invited to the meetings, just watch and listen. Who seems to be very interested? Who seems to be calling the name of the department, you know, saying how the solution is going to impact them? That's one of your stakeholders right there. And if that person isn't an actual stakeholder, they can definitely point you to one of the stakeholders you should be talking to for requirement gathering. Okay? Stakeholder analysis. Okay? Categorize your stakeholders based on level of influence and the areas of concern. We've talked about that. By doing this analysis, right, what it helps you do is to be able to adopt the right management strategy. So you know who belongs to what quadrant. You can then begin to define and design how you're going to engage them. For example, the high power, high interest, obviously, they will be very busy people. You don't want to bother them weekly, every week. Sometimes you may even just send them an update via an email and have a monthly meeting with them. Okay? By doing your stakeholder analysis early, it's going to help you with a few things. One is that you're going to avoid late emergence of conflicts, okay? If you need to be talking to somebody with high power, high interest, but you don't identify them on time, halfway through the project is when you realize who they are and you start talking to them. What if they start giving you requirements that conflict what you gathered in month one. Okay? So by identifying your stakeholders early, it helps you avoid late emergence of conflicts. It also helps you avoid misunderstanding of business needs, right? If you talk to 10 different people about what the business needs, you may get 5 different versions from the 10 different people. Okay? But when you've identified your stakeholders, you've analyzed them, you're talking to them concurrently, even if there is a conflict in people's definition of what the business needs, you become aware of that misunderstanding they have. Somebody may be interpreting it wrongly. So you've talked to 5 categories, 4 of them are saying the same thing, 1 of them is saying something different. You know there's a misunderstanding there, you can address it because you're catching it on time. It also helps avoid implementation of poor solutions. It helps you deal with communication problems, and it helps avoid resistance. You know how you may have experienced this before. You start dealing with somebody who feel like you should have been consulting with them 3 months before now. And because they feel like you came late to the party, they may begin to give you an attitude. They're not being upfront, they're not being open, they're being resistant to the work that you're doing. So again, by identifying your stakeholders early, analyzing them, it helps you avoid these 5 things. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many other things it helps you with, but we'll cap it here for now. Okay, so let's talk about the race side, or some people call it racy. Okay, this is a chart that tells you in the body of work that you're doing, which will entail many activities. It helps you document who's responsible for what activity, who's accountable. So responsible means that that person is the one who owns the task. If the task fails or it passes, it is on them. Again, remember that as a BA, you're an analyst, you're not a solutionist. Nobody expects you to do everything, but you need to have an idea of who's doing what, right? And so that's where you need to identify who's responsible. You need to identify who's accountable. Accountability has to do with decision making. If we get to a point where we need to make a decision on this task, on this activity, on this deliverable, who's the person accountable for it? You don't want to be getting authorization from the wrong person. If you do that, what would happen is that eventually when the person who should have authorized it when they become aware, they're going to resist and say, no, I didn't give you approval for that. Especially if that thing failed. Okay? So know who's accountable for what. You need to know who needs to be consulted. Okay? The key stakeholder who should be included in decision or work activity. It's more the work activity, right? So we want to do this particular thing. Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? Who do you need to consult to be able to get the clarity that you need? Who do you need to consult to make aware of, this is how far we've come. This is where we're at. This is the next thing we need to do. Okay? And then you need to know who to keep informed. Once a decision has been made, there's some people that need to be informed. Okay? Sometimes your project sponsor may not be one of the decision makers, but once the decision is made, once a decision is made, they need to know. Once an action is made, they need to know. And this is not to say that every day, at the end of the day, you're just going to go say, hi, this is the decision we made today. No. Typically, there is, what's this thing called in Outlook again? You have this recurring meetings where you're going to provide status updates. That's how it typically plays out. Okay? Now, when it comes to managing your stakeholders, it's not always all rosy with stakeholders. Sometimes your stakeholders will be resistant to you. Sometimes stakeholders will be resistant to each other. Okay? There are different ways stakeholders manage conflicts, even amongst themselves. As a BA, you need to be aware and you need to know when to intervene or escalate. Sometimes, I mean, if directors and VPs are in a meeting and they are bickering, what intervention can you really do as a BA? Sometimes the only option is to escalate it. Okay? So some of the techniques that stakeholders use in managing conflicts is, number one, avoidance. This is when stakeholders refuse to acknowledge that a conflict exists and they're just waiting for the conflict to resolve itself, fizzle out. They just turn their eye away from it. Another approach is accommodate. Stakeholders they are aware of the conflict, they would acknowledge it, okay? And one stakeholder will say, you know what, it's okay, I hear your point, let's go with your point. So one stakeholder accommodates another one, okay? Another technique they use is compete, where each stakeholder wants their own point to be the one that stands, and they pay little attention to others. Sometimes as a BA, you will be able to intervene. Let's say you're in a meeting, you're meeting with stakeholders, and there's one stakeholder that keeps talking. When another stakeholder is talking, they cut in and then they want to make their own point. As a BA, one of the things you can do is to say, okay, at this point, we're going to go around the table. We want to make sure we hear everybody's point and everybody's point is put into consideration. You're not going to be making eye contact with that stakeholder who's very competitive so they don't think you're talking to them. You're just going to look wherever and you're going to make that statement. Or you're in a meeting and one stakeholder keeps talking and you can see there's another stakeholder in the corner of the room who wants to talk, but they just seem a bit scared or a bit hesitant. Okay, you can use the round the table approach again if you don't want to put the person on the spot. Or sometimes you can just call out the name and say, oh, what do you have anything to contribute to? Do you have anything to add to what, Stella just said? But watch out for those very competitive stakeholders that they love the sound of their own voice so much and they want to keep talking and won't let any other person talk. And then sometimes stakeholders compromise. Everybody agrees. Okay, the decision that is accepted may not be their own decision, but they make the compromise. Okay, and the last one that I have on this list is collaborate. This is what you want ideally. Okay, it's a win-win scenario for everybody. Everybody comes to a consensus and they all agree. Okay, so you may see this play out in your day-to-day meetings with stakeholders. Be aware of what it is. Have an idea of when to intervene. If you intervene, it's not working and the problem lingers on, escalate it if you need to. Okay, let's talk a bit about business analysis governance. Okay, governance is a process, that where you basically determine how this deliverable, how this task is going to be managed, how it's going to be governed, basically. You identify the decision makers, the processes that need to be followed, and information required to make those decisions. A BA, of course, working with the PM, ensure that a governance process is in place. So when you join the organization, they may have already defined a governance process. If they haven't, they may be in the middle of one and expect you to contribute to it. This is a bit theoretical in the way that it plays out. It's really, how do we govern this project? How do we manage it? Where are the escalation points, basically? That would be one of the things. Okay, as a BA, where you presented the opportunity, you should participate in defining, I need to update this, in defining how decisions will be made about requirements and design. Remember that decision-making stands with you. People, you see that even my own PowerPoint is imperfect. So keep in mind that requirement decision is yours. If decisions are being made about how to go about gathering requirements, reviewing requirements, change control, be a part of that conversation if you can, if you've already been hired at that point. Because remember, there's sometimes you'll be hired into a project that started 6 months ago. It's not every time that you're going to start on day one of the project. So just bear that in mind. Okay. What is business analysis information management? It's basically all the information that you as a BA elicit. Elicit means to gather. So when you talk to stakeholders and you're gathering requirements from them, it's also called eliciting requirements. So all the information you gather, compile, analyze, share with other people, all of that is business analysis information we're talking about here. It doesn't end at requirements alone. Stakeholder concerns that were raised during the period of gathering requirements, project documents that were created, design decision, change request, all the different project documents, all of those make up BA information. Okay, so as a BA, determine how you're going to store this information, determine how that information is going to be accessed. For example, some organizations use SharePoint. They store their project documents on SharePoint, and then they put the actual requirements in Jira. Find out what your company uses, and then leverage any of those tools that can make your life easier as a BA. Okay? You need to evaluate your BA work and plan to improve it. So when they hire you, they may give you this template and that template and tell you this is how we do this is how we do that, right? If you can think of a more efficient way of doing it, communicate that with your project manager. And then if you get to go ahead, improve it. Organizations are always looking for improvement, but until you get comfortable on the job, don't even think of improving. Just first try to learn what they do and how they do it. Okay, so that you can monitor and improve performance, right? Performance measures need to be established. Okay, if you don't set the bar, you don't know if you exceeded the goal, right? When you have a goal, then you can work towards the goal, then you can exceed the goal. So basically, know how you want to measure performance. For example, you're going to be gathering requirements from 10 departments, and they're giving you 5 months to gather requirements, right? Well, you don't want to be spending 1 month on one department, unless, of course, maybe some departments are smaller in size and other ones are really big, which will then mean you don't necessarily need to spend equal amount of time gathering requirement from them. One might take 1 month, another one might take 1 week. But if you're working with 10 departments, same size, well, you should set a performance measure for yourself to say, I cannot exceed 2 weeks per department, because you have 10 departments and you have just 5 months to gather requirement from them. Okay? And then conduct, and performance measures cuts across many things, not just requirement gathering. The point here being, you need to be able to measure performance, right? You need to be able to analyze how you're doing. You need to be able to report on how you're doing. A lot of the reporting is going to be done by the PM, and they will source information from the BA to support the work that they do. Project managers rely on business analysts a lot. When you get on the job, you may be wondering, can this person just do their job? Why are they bothering me? But in reality, they do rely on BAs a lot. Okay. We're going to go into lesson 6 now. Like I said, we have a lot of ground to cover today, so hold your questions. If you have questions, I will get to it, whether your question is on lesson 5 or lesson 6. So to lesson 6 is where we're going deeper into requirement gathering. What are requirements? Requirements are basically your organization or stakeholders' expectations of what needs to be a reality in the future. So they have a current state. This is how things are today. They have a future state that they're working towards, right? Requirements are what will get them to that desired future state. So we've talked about the fact that there are different types of requirement: business requirement, functional requirement, non-functional requirement, transition requirement, security requirement, many different types of requirement. From a BA standpoint, though, the three of the very important ones that you need to feel very comfortable with are business requirement, functional requirement, and non-functional requirement. So the business requirement is something the business needs to achieve. For example, we need to grow our customer base by 30% annually over the next 5 years. It's a business requirement. It's at the business level, at the organization level. It's very high level. It is not testable. You can't give this to a QA to test. business requirements, you're going to need to wait for that future to come to see if you actually achieved it. However, functional requirements is how you want to get to that desired future state. Functional requirements is how you achieve your business requirement. So we want to grow our customer base by 30%. It means we need new customers to like our company and to buy from our company, right? We need them to come to our page. So an example of functional requirement would be the system shall display a welcome message to the user on the home page. We want our customers to feel loved. When they feel loved, they'll stay with us. They will bring business to us, right? And potentially we will grow exponentially 30% annually over the next 5 years. Your non-functional requirements are the constraints within which the functional requirement must perform. For example, the welcome message must be displayed within 3 seconds of submitting a new registration. This is a time-related requirement. We don't want our customers to be waiting for 15 seconds before we say, welcome to Blackforce or welcome to Ivory Technology Consulting. We don't want them to wait that long. That is a non-functional requirement. Okay? Again, it's the constraints within which the functional requirement must happen. So the functional requirement is we want to display welcome message, but we want the welcome message to pop up, immediately. That's the non-functional. So as a BA, as you're gathering the functional requirement, think about the non-functional as well. What are the constraints within which the functional requirement must perform? So again, we talked about business requirement, right? Business requirement is looking at what business opportunity or problem led to this initiative. What is the vision of the organization? What are the key business issues we're facing today? What are the goals for the project? What are the benefits of even doing this project? What are the specific measurable benefits anticipated? An example is what we looked at earlier, 30% increase in customer base annually over the next 5 years. Whereas the functional requirement would be something like, what does the system have to do to support each end user? When a user does X, the system does Y. These are measurable things that QA can test. What features are expected by the user? What function does the system help the user perform? Those are functional requirements. And then the non-functional, like I said, we'll talk about speed, availability, security, efficiency, all these other things which are constraints within which the functional requirement must perform. A functional requirement is that a new customer should be able to register with our business. A non-functional requirement that will go with that is that unauthorized users must not be able to log into. So as much as we want to have a lot of new customers, we don't want unauthorized customers in our system. So as a BA, when you're preparing for requirement gathering, you need to first understand the area of interest. Your requirements may span multiple departments across multiple topics. Identify all the different topics, all the different areas of interest. Determine a timeline to generate ideas. So if on the project plan, they're giving you 6 months to gather requirement, and like I said earlier, you're going to be gathering requirement from multiple departments, you need to plan your work and say, Department A, this is how long I'm going to spend gathering requirements. Furthermore, aim for participants who represent a range of applicable background and experience. Don't keep talking to one person for 6 months. As knowledgeable as they are, what they forget to tell you, they've forgotten to tell you, and you won't know what you don't know. So talk to a range of stakeholders, okay? And help your stakeholders know what is expected of them. When you go into a meeting, you're trying to gather requirements, and they've gone off track, diplomatically, bring that conversation back to requirement gathering. As a matter of fact, before you even meet with them, you should have sent them, maybe in the meeting invite, put in the body of the meeting invite what you're going to be talking to them about, so they can come to that meeting prepared. They can come to that meeting with an understanding of what you need from them. When you start engaging a new stakeholder, give them an idea of how long you're going to be engaging them for. Don't just keep scheduling meetings indefinitely and the stakeholder is wondering, this person is distracting me from my work. Let them know you're going to be meeting with them weekly over the next 1 month. Each meeting will be about 1 hour. Tell them what you're going to be talking to them about. Okay? What are your responsibilities when you're gathering requirements? Gather requirements that tie to the business objective and goal. The organization is trying to grow its client base by 30%. It is different from the organization is trying to sell more products to existing customers. Those are two different things, and the requirements for both will be different. So as fantastic as it sounds that the business should be able to sell more products to existing customers, that is not the goal of this application, and your requirement should not be in that direction. When you're done gathering your requirements, verify the requirement. Always put your requirement back in front of the people who gave you the requirement. Let them read it. You know how you would write a document, 1 week later you read the document and you make so many changes, you begin to wonder if you were the one who wrote it last week. It is the same with your stakeholders. Don't ever take whatever they tell you in that first meeting as truth. Put it back in front of their face. After a couple of days, let them look at it with fresh eyes. Communicate the requirements to the technical team. This is when you begin to work with the developers and the entire team developing the product. Manage the requirements through the software development lifecycle. We talked about software development lifecycle, right? Up until the point where that functionality, that deliverable is achieved, right? Keep managing the requirement. Groom where you need to groom. Update where you need to update. Get new requirements and make the necessary updates if you need to. Most importantly, always ask why until all questions are unraveled and the pain point is understood. I think I have a good example of this why thing here. Is this legible? Can anybody confirm to me? Can you read the text or is it too small?
It's a little small, actually.
It is? I don't know if there is a way to make it bigger, to be honest, but I'll read it out if that would help.
Okay.
So at the top, it talks about the problem. So you've identified a stakeholder, you're meeting with a stakeholder, right? And they tell you, oh, our client is refusing to pay for leaflets we printed for them. You as a BA, you say, why? Why are they refusing to pay? The stakeholder would say, the delivery was late, so the leaflets couldn't be used. You as the BA would say, why? Why were the leaflets late? The manager of printing would say, the job took longer than we expected. You as a BA should ask why again. Why did the job take longer than you expected? I mean, you've been printing for a while, you should have an idea. Then they'd say, we ran out of printer ink. You as the BA then goes, why? Why did you run out of ink? I mean, we should always have like backup, right? The manager says the ink was all used on a large last minute order. You as the BA would ask again, why did you use up all your ink on a last minute order when you knew that, of course, you're not going to ask like that. You're going to ask in a nicer way than I'm asking right now. And so you ask them why again. The manager says, we didn't have enough ink in stock and couldn't order new supplies in time. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to move this out. And then you as the BA ask one more time. Okay, no, actually. So they say we didn't have enough ink in stock and couldn't order new supplies on time. You as a BA would then start thinking, okay, so they've been able to get to the bottom of the problem. That is the essence of the why. The first thing they told you, our client is refusing to pay, is not the origin of the problem. That is the effect of the problem. By asking why, you then get to the bottom of the main point, pain point. What is actually causing the pain point? And when you have all that information, then you can do your analysis and say, okay, one of the things we could do is find an ink supplier who can deliver a short notice so that we can continue to minimize inventory, reduce waste, and respond to customer demand. Now, your project may have nothing to do with what I've just told you. I'm only showing you the logic behind the 5 whys that BAs ask, or the 1 million whys. Keep asking why till you get to the bottom of it. Chances are at the beginning of the meeting, they're going to tell you a symptom of the pain point, not the pain point. But as a BA, you don't focus on the symptom of the pain point, right? Another example would be the manager says, oh, we've been losing 5% of our client base annually over the last 5 years. They call that a problem. You as a BA would say, no, that's not a problem. There's something causing the loss of customers. That's what you need to know. As you begin to drill down, you then discover that the current application that is being used is not user-friendly. Our customers don't like using that application. And rather than use that application, they go to the competitor. Okay, and so that's why as a BA, you keep asking why. I mean, you don't want to ask them why to the point that you annoy them. So you don't just stand in front of them and say, why? 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 No, it doesn't work that way. It's going to be why as part of the sentence. So you just said that the client is refusing to pay after you deliver the leaflet to them. Why do you think they're refusing to pay? You know, and you begin to, that conversation begins to evolve. So in case you're wondering, oh, a 1 hour meeting, what am I going to be talking about for 1 hour? This is one of the ways you're going to get something to talk about for 1 hour. Because the more you ask the why, what, when, who, where, they begin to tell you more. And that's how your requirements will unfold. Bear in mind that when we talk about requirement gathering, typically you don't walk into the meeting and the stakeholder says, oh, welcome for the requirement gathering. Requirement 1, this. Requirement 2, that. No, they tell you a story. You would hear their story, and then you will pull the user stories out of the story. The story they've told you, the requirements are going to be embedded in it. So you're going to capture what they're telling you, and then you take it away and draw the requirements out of it. There's going to be a lot of noise, you know, just background information in what they're sharing with you, but you will dig out the actual requirement from there. Okay? Always confirm the requirements. Okay? What are the specific requirements expected of, you know, project deliverables? Okay? You gather these requirements. To be formally accepted, all of these requirements must meet acceptance criteria. So in case you're wondering, how am I going to know the acceptance criteria? I have an idea of the requirements, but what would the acceptance criteria be? You will get it from your stakeholder. So the stakeholder has told you that, what was the example we gave the other time? They've told you that, oh, for the new customers, right, the sales department manager has told you for the new customer, we need them to register before they can start making purchases, right? And they tell you that. And you begin to say, okay, so you need the functionality for the new customer to register. What are the details of this registration? What are the things that matter, okay? That's where you begin to unravel the fact that, okay, the email address has to be unique. That way, that is important to the sales department because they want to be able to differentiate a new customer from an existing customer, right? And so the point here being that both the requirements, which you're going to use in drawing out your user story, and the acceptance criteria, they should come from your stakeholders. Now, because you're experienced or because you've sat in this BA class and we've talked about user story and acceptance criteria, they may forget to mention some things that are important. It's okay for you to bring it up and say, oh, you were just talking about this other condition that has to be met based on this requirement. Is this other item relevant as well? And they'll be like, oh, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. It had totally skipped my mind. Okay? A requirement that does not have clear acceptance criteria will oftentimes result in redefinition and rework. If the acceptance criteria is not defined, there's no way to know if we fully understand the user story. There's no way to measure if the user story actually passed or failed, because the user story does not pass testing until the associated acceptance criteria has passed testing. If the acceptance criteria passes, then we say we're done. Okay? And so your acceptance criteria has to be documented. It has to be clear. Your stakeholders need to read it and accept it and agree that it captures what they're looking for. Otherwise, what would happen is the developers will build it, and then the stakeholders will say, no, but that's not what we meant. And then it has to be rebuilt and it will cost more money. Okay? Acceptance criteria is not only documented by the BA and used by developers. It is also primarily what QA testers use to create their test plan. So for that new user registration, where we've said email has to be unique, password has to be at least 12 characters, must include at least one capital letter, symbol, small letter, and all of that, right? QA will then create the test data based on that. Okay, QA is going to say, scenario 1, I'm going to try to register and use the password with no caps. Scenario 2, I'll try to register and use the password that has caps but no symbol. Okay, if QA doesn't see that acceptance criteria, there's no way they know to build all of this test data and use it for testing. So it's a core responsibility of a BA to document the acceptance criteria. Again, if you don't have acceptance criteria, there's no way to know if we met the requirement or not. Testing is then considered complete when the acceptance criteria have been met. Let's say QA begins to test, the acceptance criteria fails. Let's say there's 5 acceptance criteria. 4 of them pass, but 1 of them fail. They may pass that user story, but create a defect to be able to track the acceptance criteria that didn't work. Or they may fail the entire thing and wait for the full acceptance criteria to pass. Again, that's not something you really need to worry about. What you need to care about is the fact that it is your responsibility to document the acceptance criteria, to get the confirmation from the business that it is well documented and correct, and to be able to support the developers and the QA in their understanding of the acceptance criteria so they can build the right solution and test the right functionality. So let's look at acceptance criteria one more time. User story. As a user, I want to be able to create an account so that I can submit an application. Acceptance criteria. 1, only new users can create an account. 2, all required fields must be filled in order to submit a request. What are the required fields? First name, last name, email address, phone number, username. 3, a username must be unique. 4, an email address can be associated with only one account. Imagine if we stopped at just user story and we didn't have acceptance criteria, and we think that we've actually delivered the functionality. What would happen if we didn't have acceptance criteria B? We're going to have new users in the system that we may not even have their contact details. If we don't make email address mandatory, we don't make phone number mandatory, how do we reach out to the customer? Acceptance criteria is very important. Please bear that in mind. So let's take a quick look at this. To the left, we have the product backlog where you have like a long list of requirements, right? And then in a sprint, you're going to pull in the user stories you want to work on in that sprint. And then for each user story, you're going to have acceptance criteria. Sometimes it may be 1, oftentimes it is more than 1. It can be up to 5, right? This diagram shows 2, doesn't mean there's only always 2 for each user story. It could be more. Okay, so communicating your requirements. Verified requirements, these are requirements that you need to share with the stakeholders that participated in the requirement gathering session. Let them have a copy of it. Share it with them. Hopefully, as they look at it, if they missed anything, they will catch it early. BAs communicate requirements to stakeholders using a variety of tools, and we're going into the tools now. So in the first week of this training, Valerie had asked the question to say, was I going to talk about how a BA goes about gathering requirements? What are the techniques? And we're going to talk about the techniques today, okay? You should always present your requirements in a useful format. As much as you want to use BA lingo, the business you're talking to, they're not BAs, they're not developers. Your communication needs to be clear to them. They need to understand what you're saying. remember this always. Tailor your communication to your audience. The part of your audience that speak in numbers and always want to see numbers, when you're presenting to them, have the graphs in there, have the numbers in there. However, when you're meeting with stakeholders on the floor, end users, they don't care about the numbers, they care about process. Your end users care about process, not numbers. But the people who approve the project care about numbers. Always keep that in mind. Okay. Additionally, as you document requirements and the list begins to grow, organize your requirements. It's like the way you have a home, right? Living room items are in the living room. Bathroom items are in the bathroom. Kitchen items are in the kitchen. You don't put your pot in the living room and your couch in the kitchen. It's the same with requirements. Group your requirements. Group them possibly by business area. Accounting requirements, keep them together. Finance requirements, keep them together. Marketing requirements, keep them together. Let requirement, if requirement 1 is accounting department, don't follow it by number 2, marketing department. Because anybody who's reading it, it's going to be all over and it's going to be confusing. Additionally, look for links and dependencies between your requirements. There's some requirements that go hand in hand. Group them together. Okay? By grouping requirements, one of the things it helps you with is that if there's a gap in your work, it'd be easy for you to identify it. Okay? So let's say that you're still working on the new customer requirement, right? So you have registration, you have new register confirming their account, you have new register selecting products that they want to buy, you have new register making the actual purchase, you have new register, you should have new register getting a confirmation email after submitting, after making a purchase. If you group your requirements together, let's say that you missed the one for confirmation email being sent to the customer, because you group the requirements together, chances are you're going to catch it. You're going to catch that gap. But if you don't group your requirements and you have it all over, mixing it up everywhere, inside Jira or whatever tool you're using, it becomes difficult to even identify inconsistencies or gaps in your requirements. Okay? Another way to group requirements is you can group it by non-functional, so performance, availability, security, access. You can group it by, general requirements being together, technical requirements being together. Just figure out how you want to group it. There is no one size fits all, and understand it and go with it. It would make life easy for you as a BA. Okay? There's sometimes that requirements need to be negotiated. Okay? Stakeholder 1 gives you a requirement, stakeholder 2 gives you a requirement. Only one of those requirements can be implemented because they contradict one another. Neither of it is wrong, but only one can be accommodated. Okay? If this happens, you need to let stakeholders know of that conflict and create an avenue for them to discuss. It is not your duty to decide which one will be implemented. The stakeholders themselves need to decide on which one will be implemented. Okay? One of the techniques for prioritizing requirements is called MOSCO, and we're going to look at it in a bit. Okay? But you always have to prioritize requirements. At the beginning of the class, I talked about how during the course of 6 months where you're gathering requirements, you're going to gather so many requirements, but chances are you're not going to implement all of them. How do you determine what will be implemented, what should be implemented? It's by prioritizing them. And then requirements agreement is where you try to gain consensus on requirements and its prioritization from the group. Let the group agree on what is most important. I know that I've been reiterating it, and I'll say it one more time. A business analyst is not a decision maker on a project. Nobody should come back later on in the project and say, oh, it was Abiola that said we should do it this way, because it never was my job. It's above, like it's out of scope of what I was hired for. But my place as a BA is to get the right people into the room, present the situation in front of them, create an avenue for discussion, and let them discuss and decide. And then I document it. I put their names on the documents, but I don't join them in the decision making. Okay? If you try that and that still doesn't work, you can escalate it, talk to the sponsor about it, talk to management about it, pull them into the meeting if your stakeholders can't seem to agree. So let's look at MOSCO. MOSCO is a way of prioritizing requirements. There's some requirements that they are a must-have. Your company is trying to grow its client base by 30% annually. The requirement for new customers to be able to register with your company is a must-have. It is the bedrock of this project that we're implementing. You need to know which requirements are must-have. The must-have requirements are the first set of requirements that should be implemented. As a matter of fact, let's say you've been gathering requirements and now you have 100 requirements, right? You've categorized them and you have the 20 that are must-haves and you've pushed them to the top. And then over the next 1 month, more requirements surface, as some of them are must-haves as well. You're going to push them to the top of the list so that in subsequent sprints, the development team would understand that these are must-haves and begin to work on them, pull them into the sprint. Okay? The next set of requirements are should have. These are requirements that are important, but they are not vital. Okay? The must-haves must be done before the should haves. Then you have the could haves. These are the nice to haves. They are the feel good, look good type of requirement. If you don't have them, the project is not going to fail. Even though the stakeholder, to them, everything is a must-have. When you meet with them, to them, everything is a do or die affair. But you, wearing your BA hat, would sit down and analyze it, put yourself in the shoes of the end user and say, if I don't have this requirement, is the project going to fail? And oftentimes, you're not going to be able to answer that question. So what would you do? You take it back to them and say, so I understand that you've said this requirement is very important and that we need to implement it. Can you tell me the actual purpose of this requirement? And if we do not implement it for valid reasons, what will be the downside of it? If they're not able to communicate to you in clear terms, what will go wrong if that requirement is not implemented? It most likely is not a must-have. It's a could-have. Okay? Another way of spinning that is you take a real must-have, a requirement that you know is a true must-have. You now place it side by side with another requirement that they claim to be a must-have, but you know is a could-have. And then say to them, if you could deliver only one of these requirements, which one would they be? They'll be very quick to jump on the must-have. Okay? Don't walk into a meeting giving them the impression, no matter what you say, we're not going to implement it. Give them the impression we're trying, to implement, give you the solution that's going to meet the business need. But we do have constraints that we're working within. We're time constrained, we're resource constrained, and we don't have an infinite amount of money to implement everything. So we want to prioritize, help me out here. What is most important? Okay. And then there's the won't have. These are the requirements that provide little or no value. Little to no value. Okay? They're not necessary. Somebody on a happy day just mentions them and thinks that they should be implemented. So as a BA, you need to understand MOSCO. MOSCO, RACI, power influence, power interest grid that we looked at. These are very useful tools that you should have in your portfolio as a BA. When you're doing your job and you're thinking, what's the best approach here? Think about all these tools. Which is the right one? I'm categorizing my stakeholders. Okay? I need to be thinking about the power interest grid. I want to know who should own what on a project. Who is responsible, who is accountable? That's the RACI. I want to prioritize my requirements. That's MOSCO. Okay? You need to remember all these things. Go back to the slide and read them, and it will help you. Get comfortable with them. They're not complicated. Nobody's going to ask you for a definition when you get on the job. It is for you as a BA to make your work easy. Okay? So let's talk about requirement solicitation technique. There are numerous tools that a BA can use in gathering requirements. Most important thing is educate your participants on the tool you've decided to use. Let them know what to expect. When your stakeholders know what to expect, they're more open to talking to you. One of the techniques that BAs use a lot is interviews. Interviews is when you talk to one or more people and then you're documenting their response. You're talking to them about a process. You're trying to get more information. You're asking the why, the who, when, what. Okay, what does a BA do in an interview? Number one, always share an agenda before the meeting. You're sending out a meeting invite, share an agenda. Let them know what to expect so they can come prepared. If they don't even know the topic of discussion, when you introduce the topic in the meeting, that's when they're going to start thinking of the response to give you. And it's not going to be a well thought out response. Choose a location where interviewers feel comfortable and won't be easily distracted. If possible, don't meet in their office. People probably come into the office all the time asking them questions. So meet somewhere else where people are not going to be coming in to bother them. Choose a time when they're likely to be attentive. Monday morning, bad idea. Friday afternoon, terrible idea, usually. Okay? Thank your interviewers at the beginning of the meeting, during the introduction. Let them know that you're going to be taking notes or recording. I like to record meetings because honestly, if I'm talking to multiple people, they're giving me information. How am I going to capture all of that? I'm listening to understand, and I'm also documenting, right? So I record. If it's a team meetings, I record. And if it's an actual in face-to-face meeting, I may have a recorder. I hardly do that, but you can do it as a BA. The key thing is always get permission before you record. People say, oh, yeah, just put the phone under the table and record. If they find out you've done that, you're going to lose their trust, and they may even escalate it. There's nothing to hide. Record it. Let's say they get to a point, and I think I mentioned this before, where they're venting about something they're unhappy about. Feel free to say, oh, I'll pause the recording now so we can have a bit of this conversation, and then I will start recording again. Sometimes they would even be the ones to ask you to say, can you stop the recording? There's something I want to say and I don't want it on the record. But always let them know before you record them. After the interview, send the interview notes to them. It's a way for you to verify what you've captured in case you misunderstood anything or they forgot to tell you something, and as a courtesy as well. And then communicate next steps to them. Let them know what to expect next. Advantages of interviews. Requires very little preparation, requires less time for planning and scheduling, especially if you're going to be talking to a large group of people. It requires less stakeholder management as well, because interviews are a bit more relaxed, right? You're leading, you're asking the questions and they're responding. And it provides an opportunity to explore or clarify topics in more detail, as you continue to drill down, asking the whys, right? The one disadvantage of an interview is that it may reflect the interview's preconceived ideas. The way that, the way people picture things is how they talk about it. You talk to someone else about the same topic and they will give you a completely different version. So that's the thing that you have to be aware of in an interview. But overall, interviews are a great tool. There are different types of questions you can ask in an interview. Open-ended questions. These are questions that encourage discussion. So for example, can you tell me about this process, right? And so they begin to tell you, oh, we start here and we end here and we do this and we do that. The closed questions where the answer is going to be yes or no. This type of questions are good in some situations, but not in others, because it doesn't encourage organic conversation, right? So if you wanted to know something that's black or white, does the invoicing section just deal with invoices? Ask a closed question, right? You get a yes or a no, because that's what you need. Limited choice is where you give the people in the interview a restricted set of options to choose from. Would you say the system is better, worse, or about the same as it was last year. So if, again, know the type of detail you're looking for and use that to structure what type of question you're going to ask them. Then the leading questions, that's the one that prompts the interviewee by asking, would you agree that? Would you agree that if you did it this other way, this is the result that you get? Would you agree that you got this result because you did this step first? Okay, it gets them thinking. And then there's probing. Probing is usually used for follow-up. So they've answered one question and then you do a follow-up question. So each invoice may cover one or more actual customer order. And they'll be like, yes, and this is the situation where that would happen. So that is probing question. Another technique that BAs use is workshops. What do you do in a workshop? Workshop is where, typically in a workshop, you have multiple people, right? Multiple people attending, and it creates an effective way to, for the attendees of your workshop to give you high quality requirements. Okay? You can use a workshop to do numerous things. So you're using it to scope, discover, define, prioritize, and reach closure on requirements. Because in a workshop, you're getting people talking and thinking and talking. It's a workshop, everybody hands on deck. Okay, or like an interview where you're initiating the conversation and then you're getting a response. Workshops promote trust, mutual understanding, and strong communication amongst people attending, even among the project stakeholders and project team. Okay, when a cooperative approach to development is what you're looking for example, a standardization project, accounting department does it this way, finance does it this other way, marketing does it this other way. The organization is looking at streamlining the processes, right? Workshop is a good way. It's a good tool for a BA to use in that instance. What will you as a BA be doing in a workshop? You're going to focus on objectives and adhere to the agenda. So that agenda that you're going to send out to them and the schedule, you're going to follow it by the book. You're going to engage them to ensure participation. One person is being quiet, again, try to draw them out of their shell. One person is stealing the show, try to diplomatically slow the person down so other people can talk. Record the discussion yourself or use a scribe. Okay, so there's something called scribe. Usually when you go into a meeting and you're doing the talking, you have somebody who's helping you do the writing, the recording. Sometimes your project manager may help you, but in reality, a BA multitasks and does these things, and that's why you should record, especially if they've given you the permission to record. You will hardly get a scribe. You'll be very lucky to get a scribe. In the workshop, summarize key points during that session. And then after the workshop, share notes with the attendees and invite and encourage feedback. Note the main difference between interview and workshop. In interview, just like a job interview, the person interviewing you ask a question and then you talk. Ask a question and then you talk. The responses you get are oftentimes limited to the questions that you ask, right? But in a workshop, you have highly knowledgeable people, you bring them together, you throw open a topic and people start engaging. Roles in a workshop, you have the participants. Participants are willing to contribute, they're knowledgeable, and they have decision-making power. A scribe has good note-taking skills, understand the topic that is being discussed, and so as they're recording, they're not recording jargons, right? Because they understand what is being said. But like I said, oftentimes you will be your own scribe. Facilitator, who is often the BA, has good communication skills, has emotional intelligence, right? You're not shutting people down, you're encouraging people to talk, you know how to read the temperature of the room, you know how to manage the communication and get everybody talking, you know how to respectfully slow the talkative down, okay? And you can steer the group to a conclusion without influencing it. So they're talking, we're running out of time, and you need them to bring it home. You reiterate some of the key points they made and then say, based on all these points you've made, would you then say that this is the case? Okay? So you're leading them to a conclusion, but you are not a part of the conclusion. You're not putting words in their mouth. You're driving them. Okay? Other consideration in a workshop. The success of a workshop is dependent on having the right people in there. Okay? The people who can give you the information that you need. Try to have a diverse group. Okay? A homogeneous group where individuals have the same background and perspectives may lack the, where the topic of discussion is where you need different views. You don't want to use a homogeneous group. You want to use a heterogeneous group, basically. And that's where people have diverse backgrounds and perspectives, where they can talk and they'll be like, oh, really? Well, this is my interpretation of this. And another person will say, oh, no, that's my interpretation. That way, you can get a full picture. But when you talk to 10 people who think the same way, they're all going to tell you the same thing. But that isn't necessarily complete information. Okay? And if it's not possible to have, a heterogeneous group, have different homogeneous groups, meet with them, and then collate the responses you got. So the different homogeneous groups, if you brought them together, that would be a heterogeneous group. But if you don't have the liberty or the room or the resources to bring together a heterogeneous group, meet with different homogeneous groups, and then bring the conclusions together as a BA. It's going to result in better quality data, and you're going to have more complete requirements. The one thing you need to watch out for is self-sponsorship, where you have a heterogeneous group. So you're meeting with a group. In that group, you have the manager of accounting, you have the VP of accounting, and then you have the clerk. Chances are the clerk does not want to talk in that meeting. The clerk probably knows more than the VP and the manager because they're closer to the work, but they don't want to say the wrong thing, all right? So that's another thing to be aware of. An advantage of workshop is that it's faster than interviews, right? Because now you're bringing all these people together. So you can talk to multiple people at once and get more information. But it's really not a disadvantage. It's just a few things that you need to consider, right? You need more preparation for workshop. Facilitating a workshop requires skill. You may need an extra person to help you with recording. Okay? And sometimes at the beginning, everybody's waiting for who will talk first. In an interview, you're posing the question and you can pose it directly. You can call Abiola and pose the question to Abiola, but in a workshop, you don't start with mentioning names because you don't want it to look like you're picking on anybody. So it may be a bit slow at the beginning. How do you prepare for a workshop? Identify the critical stakeholders who should participate in the workshop. Carefully select your attendees. Don't let the group be too big, because otherwise it'll be difficult for you to manage. And then too many participants will slow the workshop down, while too few participants may create gaps, right? If you don't have enough people to represent the full circle of ideas that you need, there will be gaps in the information that you get. Yet, if you have too many people, it becomes a bit slow because you don't have all the time to get to everybody. Okay, define the agenda and determine what means you will use to document the output of the workshop. Okay, is it going to be a Word document? Are you going to create a PowerPoint that you're then going to send to everybody who attended the interview? Like we mentioned earlier on, use a scribe if there's one. Schedule the sessions over one or a few days. Arrange room, logistics, and equipment if this is not a room, if this is not a remote environment, right? Make sure you have a projector that's working if you're going to be using a projector and other items like that. Send materials in advance to help the interview attendees prepare so that you can have a productive meeting. Don't let your meeting be the first time people are going to hear what you want to talk about. If that is the case, you may not get a lot out of that meeting. To make the interview go, more smoothly, you can try an icebreaker, personal introductions, games. Everybody tell us what you did. Tell us, I don't know, just come up with something that will make people relax. Don't jump into requirement gathering immediately. Okay, then move on to elicit and analyze and document the requirements that you gain from the workshop. If there are conflicting views, try your best to obtain consensus. If you can't, escalate it if you need to. Escalate it after the meeting, I mean. And then maintain focus by frequently validating the session's activities with the workshop's stated objective. So when you put the workshop together, there was something you were looking to achieve. Everything that is happening in that workshop must contribute to the goal of the workshop. If somebody is going off a different tangent that has nothing to do with the topic that you're dealing with in the workshop, rein them back in diplomatically and respectfully. Okay, it is your responsibility to establish a professional and objective tone for the meeting. You personally, you need to be professional. Your slide, if you have one, has to be clean. No typos, no grammatical errors. Okay, put it in point form if you're using a slide. And then command the same from the attendees. They need to be professional, they need to be respectful. You know, the tone of the meeting has to be respectful, nobody putting anybody down. Enforce discipline, structure, and ground rules. An example of a ground rule would be, okay, in this workshop, this is going to be our approach. This is how we're going to generate conversation. These are the different touch points that we're going to have. Build some structure into this so people know what to expect. And when you start out as a BA, you may not feel 100% comfortable with everything that I'm saying. Start with one or two. People don't know what you don't know anyway, and they don't know that you really just started out being a BA. Your stakeholders you're talking to, they don't know. To them, you're a star BA. Act the part. Okay? Introduce the goals and agenda for the meeting, and then manage the meeting and keep the team on track. Again, them going off tangents is bound to happen, usually almost in every meeting. Just respectfully bring them back to the goal of the meeting, the topic of the conversation. Okay, facilitate a process of decision making. You may get to different points during the workshop where decisions need to be made. Help steer them towards the decision that needs to be made. If they keep going on and off, and they can't seem to agree, right? Reiterate the key points that have been made. Represent it to them. Make it clear that you need a decision about this particular topic. Okay? But avoid participating in that decision making. Avoid participating in them building a consensus. Let it not be said that, oh, it was when Abiola now said this that we all now agreed with her. It is not my responsibility, and I do not want to take that upon myself. Ensure full participation from everybody in the meeting. If somebody is being too quiet, look for a way to get them talking. If somebody is talking too much, look for a way to slow them down. But do not have a 1-hour meeting where one person is talking for 45 minutes. That is not a good meeting. Then you as a BA, ask the right questions. On your feet, think about the information that is being provided to you, and then you'll be asking follow-up questions. As they're talking to you, you're thinking at the same time, and you're coming up with new questions that are relevant to the topic, if necessary, of course. Another technique is note on flip charts. So you're in a meeting with your stakeholders, and the discussions that are being had are being documented on the flip chart. So sometimes, picture this, you have this room that has 4 walls, right? You have flip charts on the walls across the room, and then your stakeholders, either they're speaking their ideas and you're documenting it on the flip chart, or you give all of them markers and they go on there and they write it. You bring up a topic and they write on the flip chart. Some requirement gatherings techniques are very relaxed. Okay, the flip chart one will be an example, and everybody can see the flip chart. Everybody can see what's been written. There's post-it notes as well, where you share the post-it notes to everybody in the meeting, and you bring up a topic and they start writing their ideas and their requirements on the post-it, and they put it forward. They submit it to you, and then you take all of the post-it notes and you gather all of that information and put it in a document. The post-it notes is good sometimes when the likelihood of censorship is very high, the type of meeting where the clerk does not want to talk because they don't want to offend anybody. With the post-it notes, you don't know who's writing what, right? Everybody's going to write and they push it forward. Okay? User story is a technique some BAs use in the actual meeting, right? You already know what user stories are. We've talked about it. Mind maps is another quick one that I want to show you. So a mind map shows a proposed or existing function. It can be an IT system in relation to the people and systems that must interface with it. I think I have a diagram. Okay. So one thing to note here is that this shows a proposed or existing IT system. It's not limited to IT systems. Mind map is something even you can use in your personal life to generate ideas. And what's a mind map? You have one topic. For example, the topic here is sports, right? And so you say, okay, what are the different types of sports that we have? And people start, oh, individual sport, water sport, team sport, contract sport. And then we start with individual sport. You say, okay, tell me more about individual sport. What are the different types of individual sports? And they'll be like, oh, track, cycling, golf, tennis. Okay. And then you say, oh, track. Tell me more about track. What are the different types of track races that can be done? Then they say 100 meters, relay, this, that, right? And the benefit of this is that you want to identify all the major categories that you need to develop. Okay, you start at the high level and you start decomposing it, breaking it down. So sport is a very high level. Then we broke it down to the 4 different types of sports. Then for each type of sport, we break it down further into the different types within that. By the time a mind map is done, it's huge. It's a huge map where you've now captured all of the different topics, and those are your requirements at a high level. Of course, we use sports here, but in an IT system, right, you identify a major topic, right? A major topic like sales, for example, and then within sales, what are the different types of products that we sell? You identify the product, and then for each product, what are the different types of customers that buy this product? To identify them, and then once you identify the different types of customers, you say, where are the different locations where where are the different parts where these customers are located, and you continue to build the mind map. You continue to grow it until you identify at a very high level all the different topics that need to be talked about. This is very helpful because they bring you on a project. It's a 2-year project, and you're like, where do I even start from? I don't even have an idea of the question I should be asking, right? Identify a main topic, and then let your stakeholders help you build the mind map. By the time they keep helping you build the mind map, you begin to have an idea of, oh, okay, now let me take tennis and let me hone in on tennis. Let me gather all the requirements as it relates to tennis. When you're done that, you give it to them to verify that it's correct, and then you continue working on golf. Okay? So post requirements, yeah, Dawn, you have your hand raised. I'll get to all of that shortly. I know there will be quite a few questions today. So post-requirement workshop wrap-up. Whether it's a workshop or even any type of tool you've decided to use, if there are any open items that need to be addressed, follow up on them. Make sure you send notes to the workshop attendees, or if it's another tool that you used, whatever was discussed during that meeting, regardless of the tool, send the notes back to the people who attended. Again, courtesy, and it's also a way for you to validate that you captured the correct information. Okay, observation is another technique. With observation, the BA basically watches somebody performing a process. So rather than you meeting with the manager of accounting and them telling you verbally what they do, you sit and watch them work. Of course, with permission. Don't just go sit behind somebody without telling them you're going to be watching them. As a matter of fact, when you're watching them, if you're going to be looking at their computer, let them know you're going to be looking at their computer. If you're going to be documenting while you're watching them, let them know you're going to be documenting and get the go ahead. Okay? There are 2 types of observation. There's the passive and the active. The passive is where the BA observes the subject matter expert working and documents the observation, but stays out of their way. You don't engage them, you don't interact with them. The active is where you interact with them. They're performing a process, you're watching, you have a question, you can stop them and ask the question, they'll give you more information and you continue to watch. Whichever one you're going to be using, let them know. it's not a good idea for them to think it's going to be a passive observation, yet you're stopping them and asking questions, especially for processes that are very complex and require attention to detail. It may not be the right type for you to do active observation. Okay? The advantage is that you can see for yourself the process, how to improve it, where the headaches are. You can observe all of that firsthand. The downside is it's slow, because now you have to sit to watch them perform a task for 30 minutes where they could have told you in 5 minutes. Okay? The other thing is that it shows you, it focuses on the current state, not the future state. So you don't really get any future state ideas from observing them. All you see is what they do today. Brainstorming is another technique. So 1 second, I'm just going to see how many more we have. Okay. So brainstorming is another technique. And this technique is used in identifying all the possible solutions to a pain point. So it's similar to a workshop. Okay. The only difference is that with a workshop, right? So let's take it one step back. In an interview, you're asking questions directly. In a workshop, you say the question to generate the conversation. People start talking, right? Brainstorming is similar as well. You put a topic forward, and people, just like the word brainstorm means, right? People begin to brainstorm ideas. Okay, so the BA poses a topic, and then you facilitate the discussion, basically. Ideas that are generated, you document them, you analyze them, and where relevant, if it's a requirement, you include it in the requirement. Okay, these ideas can come from what users have experienced in the past, how they do their work today. It can come from a variety of sources. Brainstorming can be a really good way of generating a lot of ideas in a short time span. Okay, so this is just a picture showing people brainstorming different ideas. Brainstorming is really good when you're working on future states. Okay. So for effective brainstorming, a BA, identify the area of interest, communicate it to the people you're meeting with. After you've determined, so you need to determine a time limit for the group to generate ideas. If the meeting is 1 hour, you don't want them generating ideas for the entire 1 hour, because you need to reiterate some of what they've said. You need to pose it back to them. You need to validate it, right? Note that the larger the group, the more time you need. So if you choose to do brainstorming, don't make the group too large. Start small, and then as you get comfortable with it, grow it. Okay? Decide who will be included and their role. Are they a participant? Are they a facilitator? In brainstorming, even though typically a BA is a facilitator in most of the techniques, you're still facilitating in brainstorming, but you're talking less. Your role is really put the idea and let people start thinking really fast and coming up with ideas. Again, aim for participants with diverse backgrounds and experiences with the topic. And then together, like, establish the criteria for rating the different ideas. Because you're going to get a lot of ideas through brainstorming. How will you then rate each idea? You need to have that defined. Questionnaire is another tool. And like we all know, what's a questionnaire? You have a list of questions, you give it to your participants, they fill out the answers. Questionnaires are usually close-ended, so make sure you use questionnaires where it's appropriate. Don't use questionnaires where you need detailed information. Questionnaire isn't going to give you that. Okay? I'm not going to read out the text to you. Questionnaire is a pretty common word we all should be familiar with. Prototyping. This is when you create a model that shows the characteristics that the solution will have. Okay? A lot of companies use mock-ups. I've talked about wireframing in one of the classes we've had, models, visual designs, prototypes, okay? To confirm the expectation. An example would even be like a proof of concept that's not even prototype, because that one is it's bigger. right? But the idea here being that before we put the $3 million into that solution, let's create it on a really small scale, even if it's a diagram, something just to show us what it would look like. It helps with visualizing the system, okay? And if there are any problems with it, it helps with identifying the problems early on before we spend too much money. Having said that, if it is introduced too early, the natural tendency is for people to try to become designers. They're like, oh no, change this here, change that button here, change this here, change that there. But that's not the idea. The idea of prototyping is more to check, yeah, definitely is to look at the characteristics as well, right? And the qualities of the solution. But sometimes people can just get fixated on the user interface alone, not thinking about the other things that are important. Okay, and that can take away from the time that you have as a BA for the work that you need to do. Okay, prototype will not capture the flow through. A prototype cannot capture the flow through of a system. I'm missing a word there, but it should be accompanied with a written description. So let's say you create a wireframe or some type of prototype. You can put text and create. By create, I don't mean you as the BA. You may not even have the skill set to create this. But when it's created, right, you can add the text that would explain some of what the functionality would be if this was the full system. Okay? Additional text that would give meaning to the prototype. Some of the advantages of a prototype is you're not going to spend as much money or time building a prototype. Okay? And it increases user involvement because now you're putting something in front of the users, which will generate questions, bring up new ideas. It increases engagement. Okay, prototypes lack documentation. The idea of prototyping is not to document, it's to have something in front of the end users or the stakeholders. Okay, and then it impacts user expectations. Because with a prototype, there's some people who see a prototype and think, oh, this prototype is what they're actually going to get eventually. But no, the prototype is a scaled down version of the eventual solution. Okay. Document analysis. This is where, as a BA, you join a project and they give you a document to read to gain an understanding of the current state. Okay. So reviewing existing documentation on the current system, which could provide input for the new system. So it might be a user manual, interface documents, software vendor manuals, and other types of documents. It can provide valuable information, and some of the requirements can be reused. So every time we talk about current state and future state, it doesn't mean we're throwing away everything in the current state. Oftentimes, you're going to maintain a lot of what is in the current state, even though it's going to be in a new system, and then we will improve on it. Okay? Disadvantages include, existing information may be old or out of date. What is it in the document may not even reflect the current state because a lot might have been changed in the system. Let's say the current state system was implemented 10 years ago. They may have made a lot of changes over the years, but that documentation was not necessarily updated. So always bear that in mind. Existing information may not reflect what is needed in the new system. Oftentimes, there will be, that's why we have the future state, right? Because we're trying to either add to the current state or improve the current state. So if you're reading an existing documentation, it's not going to have those very important extras that we need. I believe this is the second to the last. Reverse engineering. Now, reverse engineering, these are not typical tools that a BA would use, right? I'm telling you about them so you are aware of them if it ever comes up. But the ones that I'll focus on more if I were you would be interviews, workshops, brainstorming, questionnaires. Those are the typical ones that you would use as a BA. Having said that, what happens in reverse engineering though, that's when you study a system and try to understand how the system was built. So let's say your company is using a system today and there is no documentation on the system. I'm currently working on a project now where what I'm doing is I'm going into the system to check what was built in the system and I'm documenting it. because we need to understand the current state before we can work towards the future state. So I'm going back to check what has been built and I'm documenting it because there really isn't a document that has that information right now. So joint application design, also known as JAD, it's an extended workshop. So the workshop that we talked about, this is like a longer one. Typically workshops can be 1 hour, maybe 90 minutes. A joint application design might be 3 hours. You give a break in between, you bring donuts and coffee if it's not remote, right? And it's just a longer facilitated workshop. It creates room for rapid elicitation of requirements. And you get a lot of information in that meeting. My recommendation, do not do joint application design just yet. When you get comfortable as a BA, you can do joint application design, but start with workshops, workshops, interviews, observation, okay? The downside of joint application design is you need a lot of planning and scheduling because you have more people attending and it's over a longer period. So what are the chances all your attendees will be able to attend a 3-hour meeting? It's difficult to schedule. It's a lot of commitment from your stakeholders, both in time and effort. And you need the skill to be able to manage a joint application design because it's very fast moving. So like I said, my recommendation is that shouldn't be the first tool in your toolbox as a new BA. Start with the regular ones. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. We're going to dive right into questions just because we don't have a lot of time. I'll stop sharing here. Okay, if we have questions, Dawn, go ahead, please.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I have a few questions, but I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just probably pick one and save the rest.
Okay.
So one of my questions was, if you're unsure about that a requirement is needed, or like maybe the information you got, something that somebody said is important, like you said, you go back and then they're still not able to give you a good reason why it's important.
Mm-hmm.
How do you document that?
Okay.
Not only how do you document that, but how do you also have proof that they were not clear, just in case they come out in the future and say they were clear and maybe they were not. So how do you document that to have proof? Okay,
so are you talking about a requirement that isn't clear or a requirement that isn't should have, but they're claiming it's a should have? Which one are you referring to?
Yes, something that they're claiming should be a should have, but they don't give you any information as to why it should be a should have.
Well, so if they don't give you, there's hardly any way they can claim it's a should have if they don't give you information. It's the information they give you that would support whether it's a should have or not. So if you're in that situation and they're like, no, it's absolutely a should have, but I don't have any way of proving it to you. Always bear in mind that it could be that they just don't know how to communicate it, but it's really a should have. But you don't know what you don't know as well. Pull your PM into it, escalate it. If you've tried everything you can as a BA, you're still not convinced it's a should have, pull the right people into the meeting. Talk to the developers about this requirement. Ask, are there any dependencies? Because there may be a dependency. The requirement itself might look like it's not a should have, but it's a requirement that if it's not implemented, there are 10 other requirements that cannot be implemented. You may not know that. If you've exhausted all of those options and you as a BA are still not convinced it's a should have, and the business is pushing that it's a should have, escalate it. Let someone else's name get on it. Because at the end of the day, you as a BA, no matter what, are never going to be in a position to determine that something is not a should have. You're not the business. So the business has to eventually be convinced that it's not a should have. And if you're not able to convince them, then you need to pull in somebody who can help you.
Okay, great. That was really good. Thank you for that. Can I ask this last question quickly? I'm sorry.
Don, you know what? I'll come back to you if we have enough time, but I just want to make sure we get through everybody who has a question. So we'll take one question each first, and then we'll go back around. Okay, thank you for understanding. Dorcas?
Sorry, it's actually John.
Oh, John.
That name keep coming back. That's my wife's name. Thank you, Abiola. But after listening to you, I was beginning to get too much impression that the BA has all the full authority to determine which of the techniques to use. I mean, is that in practical terms? Is that what happens?
Yes, you do, to a very large extent. I mean, unless your PM says, oh, for whatever reason, I want you to do it the other way, or you get there and they're like, this is how we've always done it. But no, as a BA, feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, you are the one who will be in the meeting with the stakeholders. So if somebody pushes you to do joint application design, and you already know it's not your forte, my recommendation, don't do it. Use the tool that you feel comfortable with, but the tool you're using has to be appropriate for the audience as well. You're not going to put VPs and directors in a meeting and do joint application design, right? The tool has to be right for the audience, but it's very important that it's a tool you feel comfortable with as well. Your PM should not be dictating to you. Your development team should not be dictating to you what tool you should use. You as the BA should have that liberty, but just make sure you pick the right tool for the right audience. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Kachi.
Okay. Thank you so much, Abiola, for the classes today. Okay, my question will be around stakeholder analysis. So I want to find out in categorization of my stakeholders, as the project timeline increases, is it possible that a stakeholder that is high influence and high interest can possibly become maybe low influence and high interest? Does the stakeholder quadrant shift?
It does.
Okay.
It does shift, because somebody who's low interest, low power today is promoted to the department that directly benefits from that implementation, suddenly moves quadrant. So I think that's an excellent question. That's why you need to keep monitoring your stakeholders and where they fall into the quadrant. In fact, sometimes a new stakeholder surfaces that you then need to figure out which quadrant they belong to. So it's a moving piece, really.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Shola?
I think Kachi just asked my question. I was just about lowering my hand. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Okay. Stella?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you for the session this evening. It was really very interesting. I enjoyed every bit of it. My question, though I have two questions, but you said you're going to take only one. Is there anybody that kind of validates the requirement? Reason being that sometimes the stakeholders' requirement might come with a cost. And let me say like licenses or anything, it may come with an additional cost. So is there anybody that kind of validates that requirement that say, oh, based on the cost, we may not do this, we may not do that, or it's just left for the BA to say, okay, I gather all the requirements and I must put everything into the project?
Yes, so very excellent question. As a BA, your job is to gather all the requirements and document it. If there's license costs and all of that, the PM should be aware. Because you're not going to get, okay, so let's say that the organization is going to need 200 licenses, which will cost 1 million. Just an example, right? You're not going to capture that in your requirement. What you need to capture in your requirement is that this department needs to be able to utilize the function of the license. You're not going to document that we need 200 licenses. Let's say that by buying the license, we're going to be able to perform ABC. In your requirements, what you're documenting is that as a user, I need to be able to perform A, so that as a user, I need to be able to perform B, so that you're not going to include anything about the licenses in there. It is the project manager's duty to know, because it's a project cost and the project manager manages project cost, to know that we need $1 million for project licenses. So even if you never make reference to it as a BA, which you really shouldn't, the project manager should be aware. Now, in your conversation with the project manager, if you're looking at the project plan, the project documents, and you don't see anything to that effect, you can bring it up in your conversation with him, but your requirements will not talk about licenses. Your requirements will not say, and we need 200 licenses to be able to do that. No, we don't care about the licenses from a requirement standpoint. We care about what we can achieve with the licenses. And so that's why you as a BA will not deprioritize the requirement because it's expensive, because you don't know that and you really should not concern yourself with it. You're just going to focus on the actual requirement.
Okay.
Does that help?
Okay, it does. It does.
Okay, fantastic. Bumi?
Hi, Abiola. Thank you for the class. So I asked this question last week, Thursday. You said I should wait until you teach us on stakeholder management. Yeah, it's just about how can a BA handle a difficult stakeholder? So I don't know if you can.
Yeah, let me talk about that. Thank you for being patient with me. So it depends on why the stakeholder is being difficult. Are they being difficult to you? Are they being difficult to other stakeholders? Let's say that they're being difficult with you, right? You're finding increasingly difficult to work with them. They're declining your meeting request, or even if they come to the meeting, they're not talking. They're just showing face and not contributing to anything, all right? You as a BA should wonder why. They're just meeting you. They don't have a history with you. Why do they not like you? Is this something about your approach, or is it a reason that has nothing to do with you, but you are the one who's just getting the you're the one that's feeling the aggression, even though you're not the cause of whatever it is they're dealing with? One of the things I have done in my approach, and I'm hoping that in the last week of class, when we do like interviews, talk about interviews and all of that, I can share a bit more of my experience. But because you asked now, one of the things I've done in dealing with difficult stakeholders is to reiterate how I can better their life. And by that, I mean, I'm here to help you solve problems. I'm here to help you improve on your processes, right? So work with me here. If someone is threatened by me, for example, when I worked in the insurance company, I told the class about it, right? People felt they were going to lose their jobs. And this Abiola lady is the one who's getting the information from them that if they share that information with me, they now end up losing their jobs. At least that was what they thought, right? So now I had that responsibility to help them to rephrase the whole thing, to say, no. I'm not here to take away your job. I'm here to understand your processes today, look for ways to help you improve it so that you can use your time for more valuable things. But that wasn't achieved in one day. There were weeks of them just gossiping about the project department. And you see, the PM didn't really feel it because the PM was not the one going to meet with them. I was the one going to meet with them. So I know a lot of you haven't seen my face, but I smile a lot, you know, when I'm talking to them to help them feel more relaxed. I think that maybe my voice helps them as well. I don't know. But eventually, even the most difficult stakeholders that I've worked with, you know, those ones that wished I was never hired, they would eventually come back on board. I think it becomes difficult for somebody to not like you when they think you're in their camp, when they think you're there to help them. Okay? So it's going to be a little here, a little there. You working to convince them of how, just give me 1 month of your time and see how much better I can make your work. However, let's say you end up with that one stakeholder that just does not even want you to exist at all. You've tried everything you possibly can, and they're not having it. It may just be that you need to find another stakeholder to work with. But in coming to that conclusion, involve other people. Don't just decide and say, man, I've tried with this stakeholder, they're not liking me. As a matter of fact, even I don't like them. I don't even want to deal with them anymore. So I'm going to find somebody else. No, let it be documented. Let your project manager know about it. You and your project manager may decide to escalate it to the project sponsor, right? And eventually, maybe it would even come to light that this person, it felt like they were being aggressive towards you, but it was completely something different going on at work. Maybe a family issue they're dealing with. It could be many different things, right? But what can you do? What's within your power to do is to be extra nice, extra polite, extra professional. When you schedule a meeting with them, don't ever be late to the meeting. Go to the meeting prepared. Once the meeting is done, send them the information that you gathered. Always ask for their feedback. People like the sound of their own voices. Let them talk. Don't go into a meeting with them and do the talking for 1 hour. They already don't like you and now they need to listen to you for 1 hour. Don't do that. Let them talk. Make them feel important. As a BA, your soft skills will take you much farther than your technical skills ever take you. As a matter of fact, I know non-technical BAs that are doing so well, it's unbelievable. They're not technical, but the soft skills, they know the right time to smile, the right time to talk. And I know all these things sounds a bit fluffy and flimsy, but in reality, you will need it. So I hope that helps, right? In terms of how to...
Sure it does. Thank you so much. That was a great response.
Hi, baby. Hi. I like babies. Okay. So who's next? Yeah, no problem. Shola, is this second Shola or?
Yes. One
okay.
Two.
Shola, go ahead.
Thank you. Great class. Moving away from a difficult stakeholder, how do you manage a stakeholder who tends to have a preemptive solution? Perhaps they've seen it in other places and it has worked, and they don't think there's a need to go through all the requirement gathering, calling for meetings and all of that. And they just felt, why don't we just copy and paste and adopt this solution that is working in a similar organization and all of that? And let's say, for instance, they have on the eye as far as their influence or interest is concerned. They are not difficult. That's why I said moving away, but they just felt we don't need to waste time.
Yeah. Okay. So a stakeholder who feels that they already know what would work and they just want to tell you what would work and you go implement it. One of the things that I will do in that situation is to say, this is a fantastic idea and I'm really looking forward to leveraging the knowledge that you have. I only want to make sure we're putting it in the context of our organization. So there's probably a lot that we can reuse based on what you're going to share with me, but let's think about it in the context of our organization. There are things we do differently from that other organization. So let's talk about it. So they're going to tell you the things that they already know, and that's fine because, excuse me, even if you were talking to somebody who's not preemptive, somebody who doesn't have knowledge from a prior experience, they're still going to be sharing with you knowledge from their current experience. No matter the stakeholder you're talking to, they're sharing some type of experience with you. However, somebody who wants to just take something from another organization, there's nothing wrong with you getting all that information from them. It's actually part of your work done. When I worked at the insurance company, we were going to implement electronic signature. You know how they send documents to you and you sign electronically. The director told me to find out from this other company how they implemented it. So that's not lost knowledge, actually. Even though it sounds like they're being preemptive, you just need to make sure that they're putting into consideration everything that's important. And if all they're willing to tell you is what they know from the other experience that they have, then get context from your other stakeholders. Chances are you're not going to be talking to only one stakeholder. My recommendation is from them, get the contextual requirement from them. So even though they're taking prior knowledge and sharing it with you, always bring them back. Okay, so in the context of our organization, what does that mean? Get as much as you can. And if they're not willing to do more than they've done, get that context from other people. At the end of the day, what they give you is what you're going to get. You can't force a stakeholder, right? And that's why you have these heterogeneous groups and you have a diverse group of stakeholders so that everything will complement, all the stakeholders will complement each other in their contribution at the end of the day. Does that make sense, Shola?
Absolutely, Abiola. I think the explaining from the contextual aspect of things makes a whole lot of sense. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, people, we're going to go over by maybe 4 minutes today. There's still 3 hands raised. Adiola,
Thank you, Abiola. So I just want to double check with you. Is it possible for, okay, so we're trying to gather requirements from one of the stakeholders. Is it possible for the stakeholders to tell you not to go ahead with the recording? Or if it's yes, okay, would they be willing to allow the BA to jot down some requirements? If not, what would be the next line of action?
Yeah, sorry, I missed the first part of your question. You said, is it possible for the stakeholders to do what?
To stop you from going ahead when recording. Like, for example, you're trying to gather some.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And they tell you, I'm not comfortable with you recording.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Possible. Okay, but
yeah,
would they be willing?
Okay, go ahead.
Go
sorry.
ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's possible. What if they want to say will make their manager look bad? They don't want you to record it, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But would they be willing to allow the BA to go ahead with the jotting?
To go ahead with the what?
Jotting, like if they don't want
yes, they're typically okay with you writing the requirement. It's the recording, right? People don't want their voice sometimes. They don't want their voice captured.
Okay.
Right, but because with the voice you can identify who told you, but if you're writing it down, because you're going to be talking to maybe 10 people at the end of the day, and when you're circulating the document, you're not going to necessarily say line 1 Abiola said, line 2 Shola said. You know what I mean?
Okay, but what if they start complaining about the time, that they don't have enough time for the writing down of the requirements?
If who starts complaining? The stakeholder?
Yes.
The stakeholder is not the one writing, you are the one writing.
I know. I'm saying while doing the writing and they start complaining that it's time wasting, what do we do?
So they don't want you to record and they're complaining about you writing. Yeah, that's a stakeholder that needs work. You don't have that many options. You're either going to record or you're going to write. There's no way you're going to remember everything said in a 1-hour meeting, right? Yeah. And so before you start writing, you're not even going to ask for the permission to write. You're going to tell them that you will be writing, just to make sure that, you're respectful of their time. You want to make sure you capture everything they're going to be telling you in the meeting, so you're not asking them the same questions over and over again. When you spin it that way, chances are they're not going to tell you not to write. And when you're writing too, you're not writing verbatim. You're not writing every single word they tell you. That's why, the best case scenario is to have a scribe so you can do the talking. But when you don't have, you're going to need to learn. You're going to learn to write in point form. They talk for 2 minutes and it might just be one line you're going to write. And then when you take it away, you're going to try to remember the context of what they were telling you to be able to flesh it out.
Okay.
But you're not writing every single word. Otherwise, you're not going to get through anything in that meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, practice makes perfect. That's what I would say, Adiola. When you start out, it's going to look like a lot. I just prefer when they let me record, even though I don't like listening to the recording later. I have to be honest. I feel like it's double work. So I used to record a lot, but my writing, because I write fairly fast as well, my writing got better. Now I just write, because when I write, I don't have to go back to listen to the 1-hour recording. When you're starting out, though, my recommendation would be to ask them, tell them you're going to be recording, or ask them if you can record, and then just record it so you can go back and remember. A lot of oftentimes I don't record now as well, because I've worked on so many projects and I've worked on similar projects. So sometimes even before walking into the room, I already have an idea of what the requirements will look like. It does take time to get to that point, right? But my recommendation will be, when you're starting, just record if you can. It will make life a whole lot easier.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Stella?
Thank you very much. While you were talking about gathering stakeholders' requirement, I was imagining of a scenario whereby, now I don't know if it is being used, or what's your take. I could say, okay, this is how I want to go about it. I am sending a brief to the stakeholders, telling them what I want to do and what I want to achieve. And in that brief, I could use emails, just send them email, and then I send them the brief. And I would ask them to respond by sending their requirements in. Is that scenario doable?
I guess anything is doable, but it's not recommended.
Okay. Then secondly, when you were talking about with using a tool that we are actually comfortable with. Now, in terms of questionnaires, in terms of workshops, or in terms of interviews, does the organization have a template, or you as a BA, you have to come up or develop your own template with your own questions?
It could be either or. Some organizations have a template that's good. Some of them have a terrible template and you need to create one, but there's no one size fits all. When you get on the project, you find out what they have. If they don't have something that you need to create it, or phone another BA. Everybody in class now, connect with each other on LinkedIn. Most likely you all are going to find jobs around the same time. They may have a template they can share with you. Of course, I'm not recommending anybody steal a template from their company and start sharing it with everybody, but you know what I mean? Connect with people, and you never know what resources you'd have access to. But to your question, right? Oftentimes an organization will have its own templates, and sometimes they don't. You need to create it. Sometimes you can even download it from the internet. Trust me, it's not that complicated.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Moya, sorry, I think that's the last question for the day.
Yeah, thank you, Abiola. So I want to ask, among all the techniques mentioned or you listed, which one is most popularly used? And for each technique also, is there a point that you have to use one maybe for a stakeholder, or I'm confused now.
That's okay. I would say that the one that I find that is the most popular and that I use the most is interview. That's what I use the most. When I'm meeting with people and I'm interviewing them and I'm saying, tell me about this process, tell me more. So you said this, does it mean that? That's what I use, right? And what technique do you use when? Like I said earlier, first figure out your audience. When you know your two key factors, who's your audience, what do you feel comfortable with? Those two questions should help you choose the right technique. But nobody is going to, ideally, nobody should be forcing you to use a particular technique. You're the one who knows what you're comfortable with. Use it, but make sure what you're using is right for the audience, the right technique for the audience. Okay? Does that help, Moyo? Sorry.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for hanging in.
Sorry.
Hi.
Yeah, this is Oyin. I just wanted to bring your attention to that. There was a question much earlier in the chat.
There was?
Yes. I think Valerie asked that question, and she wanted to know
okay. Who to escalate to? Is that the question?
Yes, to escalate to, yeah.
Valerie, is that if you have a difficult stakeholder? What is the context of that question?
Yes, if you have difficult stakeholder.
Difficult stakeholder,
you
okay.
Escalate, yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'll tell you to escalate to in a minute, but let me tell you this first. Know that once you escalate, you may actually lose that stakeholder, right? It's almost like when you've reported your friend and then you go back and you want to be friends with them. So if you're going to escalate nicely. Don't make it feel like an escalation. But that aside, who do you escalate to? Start with your project manager. All forms of escalation you shouldn't go above your project manager to start escalating unless the project manager is not available. Difficult stakeholder, escalate to the project manager. Requirements are getting out of hand, escalate to the project manager. So you need to work closely and feel comfortable working with your project manager. But that is the person, that should always be your first point of contact for escalation. Okay?
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Okay, that helps. Awesome. I'm glad we got through all the questions today. I know we covered a lot today. You're going to be getting the slides for lessons 4, 5, and 6. Hopefully by end of day tomorrow. You're also going to be getting your next assignment by end of day tomorrow. We're going to start presenting on Tuesday. That would give you the weekend to work on the presentation and Monday to ask questions if you have any. Okay. I hope you all have a good night and a fantastic weekend, and I look forward to connecting with you on Monday.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Abiola. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.